Today's shiur begins at the second line from the top of Daf Chof Beis. We are in a position of direct continuity from that which we discussed in our previous shiur. On the side of the Gemara, under the Nosei, the topic heading, we've indicated what the Gemara asks, Ezu Am Ha'aretz, what is meant by the classification of an individual as being an Am Ha'aretz. Generally speaking, the term Am Ha'aretz is associated with ignorance of halacha and non-scrupulous fulfillment of Jewish precepts. Let's continue now in the Gemara itself. Itmar. Kora v'shana v'lo shimesh talmidei chachamim. One who has learned the written Torah, the scriptures, the Tanakh. V'shana, he has learned Mishnayos. V'lo shimesh talmidei chachamim. Now this expression, if you translate it literally, means that he hasn't served Torah scholars. But it would be a disservice to each one of us if we left it as a literal translation. The expression v'lo shimesh talmidei chachamim, as we saw in our previous year, in the phrase just above this line, is a reference to the study of Gemara, what we call Gemara, or of Talmud. The role of the Talmud, amongst other things, is to reveal the meanings behind the Mishnayos. The Mishnayos are written in a rather terse form with many points of explanation deliberately left out. The Gemara reveals those explanations. Rashi on the top, that we learned in our previous year, goes through these points. So that one who has studied Tanakh and has studied Mishnah but has not become proficient in Talmud is considered Rebbe Lezer Omer HaRav Yehonasan. Someone like that is considered an Amoretz, and in practical terms, Rashi points out, you cannot trust him regarding matters of tithing produce, nor matters of taharos, of ritual purity. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani Omar Harei Ze Bur. Bur is a level of ignorance that's even less than, or I should say a lower level individual. It's more ignorance. I can't say less ignorance. It means more ignorant than an Amoretz. Rabbi Yanai Omer Harei Ze Kusi. The term kusi is a term throughout the Shas. It has rather a flexible meaning depending on the context in which you find the word. Kusi very often is a code word for a Gentile. In this case, Rashi says, he's a kusi v'asu lechol pito v'yeno. You can't eat his bread, nor can you drink his wine. And Rashi says, shalosh shimesh chachamim, since he hasn't fulfilled shimush chachamim, he hasn't studied the Talmud, eno makpid al divrei chachamim lida'atom. He isn't caring about what the ideas and the rulings of the chachamim are. V'lo shana, and his study of Mishnayos is elo laharos atzmo kit talmud chacham. This is create a false impression, which ties into what we discussed at the end of our previous shiur. So that this is a further, let's say, degrading of someone who is korov v'shana v'lo shimesh talmidei chachamim. And going down even more, Rav Acha Bar Yankiv Omer Harei Ze Mogush. He is a sorcerer. He is a person whose whole, his whole being is simply to trick the public, to making them think that he is something that he is not. Just like a sorcerer does tricking the people, so too he is a trickster. Omar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok Mistabrak Rav Acha Bar Yankiv. Rav Acha Bar Yankiv's classification is the most likely. The Amri Inshi, people say, Rotin Magusha V'lo Yoda Mai Omar, Toni Tana V'lo Yoda Mai Omar. Just like the Magusha, the sorcerer, says all kinds of incantations that he himself doesn't understand what they mean, but he says them anyway. So too those that study, or those that read or study Mishnayos without the Gemara interpretation are saying things that they don't really understand. I would like to make just an editorial note. When we speak about the study of Mishnayos without the study of Gemara, what we are referring to primarily is those who read the Mishnayos and just read the text as it is. There are numerous commentaries that exist on Mishnayos that actually present as part of their commentary we'll say the Gemara in a rather succinct fashion. So that when you're studying the Mishnayos in that way, you're actually studying the Mishnayos with a deeper interpretation alongside. I'm not sure that is what the Gemara has in mind over here. But rather, as we said, it's those who study Mishnayos, they read the Mishnayos like people read psukim, verses from the scriptures without any interpretation. Tonu Rabbana. Ezu Am Oretz. Here we have a Tanaic source that deals with the topic that we've been discussing till now. And you'll see in this source the use of a diamond, and on the side under the Mivneh heading we indicate Yerida b'madregos. As we go on in the source, you'll see a decline in level as we present people that have done less and less. So at this point we're going to speak about people that have done certain things, and they're called an Amoretz, and we have a number of opinions on how one would be classified as an Amoretz. Remember, we said before, a practical application of being classified as an Amoretz is someone that you wouldn't be able to trust for tithings and for ritual matters, ritual purity. The Gemara. Ezu Amoretz, Kol she'eno korei kriyas shema shachris v'arvis bevirchoiseo, divrei Rabbi Meir. An Amoretz is one, according to Rabbi Meir, who does not recite the Kriyas Shema with its accompanying benedictions every morning and every night. We glance at Rashi, about almost halfway down the Rashi column. Kol she'eno korei Kriyas Shema daha vadai eno yodea klum. Someone who doesn't recite Kriyas Shema, you can rest assured, knows nothing. This is a very benevolent opinion. If he knows how to say Kriyas Shema, and means he knows how to recite the words and read it, Rabbi Meir would not call him an Amoretz. Let's continue. V'chachamim omrim kol she'eno miniach tefillin. Who is an Amoretz? Someone who does not wear tefillin, doesn't put on tefillin. Renazai omer kol she'en lo tzitzis b'vigdo. Someone who wears a four-cornered garment without the required tzitzis fringes in each corner. Rabbi Yonasan ben Yosef Omar Kol sheyesh lo bonim v'eino megadlon lilmod Torah. An Amoretz is someone who has sons and does not raise them in the study of Torah. Acherim omrim, and here is an opinion that will be familiar to us. Afilu korei v'shoneh v'lo shimesh talmidei chachamim zehu Amoretz. Up till you get to the Achirim, you might have noticed that each one of these opinions, Rabbi Meir, Chacham, Ben Azin, Rabbi Yosef, we're all speaking about things that have relevance to the Kriyas Shema itself. The Tefillin, of course, as a mitzvah that's mentioned in the first two paragraphs of the Kriyas Shema. Ben Azai made reference to the tzitzis, which you see in the third paragraph of the Kriyas Shema, and the issue of educating children is something that also figures quite prominently in the Kriyas Shema. We continue now with a lower level. Korah v'lo shana harei zeh bur. One who has read scriptures and hasn't studied Mishnayos is a bur, and we saw before that a bur is considered a lower level than an Amoretz. Lo korah v'lo shana. Someone who hasn't bothered even reading scriptures and not Mishnayos. Olav HaKosav Omer. Regarding him, the pasuk says, "V'zorati es beis Yisrael v'es beis Yehuda zera Odom v'zera behema." The pasuk refers to the nation of Israel being planted with the seed of man and the seed of animals. So that, mincing no words, the Chazal say someone who hasn't engaged in any aspect of Torah study is an animal. Needless to say, there are people that might be insulted by that, but why be insulted when, if you think about it at a certain level of depth, calling an animal is an apt description of a creature that hasn't engaged in anything of any divine nature. It eats, so people also eat. It sleeps, And so do people also sleep. Animals engage in procreation, and human beings also do that. Where's the difference? So where are you going to find the difference between an animal and a human being? Animals will bask in the sun and find a breeze and shoo away flies to seek its comfort. So human beings might do all kinds of activities that are also in pursuit of comfort. So what's the difference between sailing a luxurious yacht and lying under a tree, a very shady tree on a very hot day? They're basically the same general point of pursuit of pleasure. So where will you find the difference? You'll find the difference only in the realm of the divine. And hence, the realm of the divine is classified as the study of Torah. And as the Gemara says, at the end of the first parak of Maseches Kiddushin, that where there's a discussion between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Kiva, Esu Gadol, Talmud Gadol, Lamaisa Gadol, and the conclusion of the Gemara is, Talmud Gadol, the study of Torah, is greater than the performance of Maisim Tovim. Someone might come along and say, well, animals aren't known for the practice of philanthropy and for good deeds. But truth be told, as the Gemara there says in Kiddushin, that without the study of Torah, you're not really going to know how to do good deeds. So even good deeds, without the study of Torah behind them, might very well be empty. Well, what do we mean by that? Take, for example, the mitzvah of visiting the sick. Very important mitzvah, an act of kindliness. But do you know that there are certain types of ailments that actually the visitation irritates the patient? How are you going to know about that if you don't study the Torah? Do you know that, of course, giving charity is charitable, is kindly? Animals probably don't do that. But did you know that there are certain types of or methods of giving charity where you might end up losing more than you gain? As we say in Hebrew, Yotzes Chara Be'afsedo. If, for example, you give someone charity and you remind them, listen, I know you're having hard times, you just had to close your business, take this to carry you over for the next week. Yeah, but maybe the person would prefer you're not mentioning at all his having closed his business than giving him the charitable funds altogether. The list can go on and on, so that without the study of Torah, as the pasuk says, the person and the animal are essentially one and the same. The Gemara continues, Yoro es Hashem b'ni v'melech v'im shoinim al tis'arov. The pasuk for Mishlei is exhorting the individual to not be with the shoinim. Omar Rebbe Yitzchak, Elu sheshoinim halochas. Not to be company with the shoinim are those that shoinim halochas. What does that mean? Shoinim halochas is a reference to mishnayos. The term halochas you find often throughout the Shas as a reference to mishnayos, as opposed to when we use the term halacha, very often we're referring to applied practical law. Rashi here says, Sheshenim halachas shelo shimshu l'talmidei chomim. They didn't study Gemara. V'lo hikpidu al tamei mishnayos. They're not diligent in the reasons behind the mishnayos. The Gemara asks, Pshita. Rashi says, Pshita dahachi hu ela b'may nidru she'ilav machi. What is Rav Yitzchak telling us that we wouldn't have known on our own by simply learning the pasuk? So the Gemara says, Mahu detema, without Rabbi Yitzchak, I would have read the pasuk and I see the word shoinim and I would have taken it to mean shoinim b'chet. Shoinim means to repeat, and in this case, repeat sins. Rav Huna, and based on Rav Huna's teaching, the Omar Rav Huna, kivan shover odam avera v'shana ba, once a person sins and repeats the sin, hutra lo. It means it's as if it is permissible in his eyes. So the pasuk might very well be saying, "Im sheinim al tisarav," don't be amongst the sinners. Kamashma, Rav Yitzchak is saying that might very well be true, not to keep company with sinners, people who are repeat offenders of the same sin, but rather, in this case, the Pasuk is saying, don't keep company with those who simply recite Mishnayos without the accompanying Gemara explanation. Tana, Hatanoim Mevale Olam. Here we translate literally, and it says that that Tanoim is associated with Mishnayos, are destroyers of the world. So the Gemara says, Mevale Olam Salkadaitoch. Rashi says, Mevale Olam Salkadaitoch. Mahem Gormim Lachirim. What do they cause to others? How do they cause destruction of the world? Amar Ravina. Now we'll get into a more clear explanation. Shemoirin halacha mitoich mishnasan. Tanoim in this case is not a reference to the rabbis of the Mishnayos. We use the term Tanoim and Amoraim as referring to the great rabbinic figures you find in the Talmud. It means those who recite Mishnayos, and through their recitation of the Mishnayos, they also rule halachic decisions. And Rashi says, "Shemorin halacha mitoch mishnasan ka'omar shemevalen oilim baros tos." They destroy the world with their erroneous judgment. The kevan the ein yoidin tamei Mishnah, since they don't know the reasons behind the Mishnah. Pomim gormim shemedamin lo dover sheinu doma. They might make comparisons between topics that are not to be compared. The oid yesh mishnayos harbe damrinon ha'amani plonihi v'chidahi v'les. Say there are many mishnayos where when you study the Gemara that's pertinent to that particular Mishnah, you will see the Gemara reveals that the opinion reflected in the unnamed Mishnah is actually the opinion of a singular or minor opinion, and the halacha would not follow that Mishnah. And yet, if you don't have the Gemara knowledge, you might read such a Mishnah and conclude that that's the halacha. V'yod, and a third problem, she'enon yoidin b'machlokas tanem rishonim halacha k'divrei mi hilkoch murin haros tos. And they also, by not studying the Gemara, they don't know that when you have early Tanaic controversies, there are those opinions that you are to follow, and they will end up ruling once again erroneously. So we now turn back to the Gemara. Tanya Nami Hachi. We have a Tanaic source that supports what we just explained when having learned the reference to Tanoim Mavali Olam. Omar Rabbi Yoshua V'chi Mavali Olam Hein. So the Brisa asks the same type of question that we in the Gemara had asked, and that's why we're bringing this in as support to our analysis. Rabbi Yeshua says, are you to describe Tanoim as destroyers of the world? V'lo miyashvei olam heim. The Tanoim are those that establish the world. Shenemar halichos olam lo. And on the side, you might note there's an addition that might be familiar to many of you who daven, who pray from a siddur. It says there, al tikri halichos elo halachos. The halachos are the halachos and we said halachos are reference to Mishnayos. They establish the world. So how can you refer to Tanoim as mevale olam elo shemoirin halacha mitoch mishnasan? Just as Ravina explained, so you see in this Brisa, when we speak about Tanoim mevale olam, it's a specific reference to those who study just Mishnayos without a Gemara explanation and rule halachic matters thusly, based on that type of study. Isha Prusha V'chulei. We saw in the Mishnah the titles of different people, say references to different people as being destroyers of the world. And the term Isha Prusha came up. Here the Gemara elaborates. Tonu Rabbanon, Besula Tzalainis, Valmona Shevavis, V'kotin Shelo Kolu Lo Chadoshev Hare Elu Mavali Olam. The Gemara will ask a question in wonderment, and of course, as is often the case, the question is based on having read the source very superficially. So it's a little hard at this point to offer too much translation, bearing in mind that the Gemara itself will clarify it. So we're going to take the approach right now of not translating much of the source, other than saying there's reference in this source to a virgin girl that's called Salinus, And Talainus is a term that we'll have to explain later. Almona is a reference to a widow. Shovavis indicates she's with her neighbors. She's a neighborly type widow. And Kotan Shelo Kolulo Chadashov, that has to be explained by the Gemara later. All of these are called destroyers of the world. The Gemara now asks a question, and notice it's a long question, and in certain terms you'll see are double underlined. They're here to highlight the points of question. We made, let's say, a negative reference to a basula, and we're going to see to the contrary. We made a negative reference to an almana, we're going to see to the contrary. So we're going to have to go back and ask ourselves, what is the source really talking about? So the Gemara asks, Eini, is that so, that they are destroyers of worlds? We have learned what it means to be God-fearing from a certain maiden, young girl, and we've learned the concept of reward for mitzvahs from a widow. Now the story involving learning fearing of sin from a basula. Rabbi Yochanan heard a certain young girl that literally fell on her face. Fell on her face is an expression associated with a certain type of intense prayer, davening. We have on a daily basis something we call Nefilas Apayim, which is a special prayer of beseeching that follows the Shmona Esrei. So here it's a case of a young girl that was praying V'komra, and he heard in her prayer the following: Ribono Shalom, she beseeches the Almighty, Barasa Gan Eden, Barasa Gehenim. You created paradise and you created purgatory. Barasa Tzadikim, Barasa Rishoyim, you created the righteous and you created the wicked. May it be your will that people do not stumble as a result of me. How often it is the case that people's eyes, men's eyes particularly, are attracted to beautiful women. And that traditional Judaism teaches us to restrain ourselves in that area, but it's a very challenging area of personal behavior. And this girl was very sensitive to the fact that people might be gazing upon her, and that resulting in their sinning. She didn't want to be the source of their sinning. There's a very extreme story that we're not going to get into now, but you find it in Maseches Tainis concerning the daughter of one of the Talmudic personalities that was the source of people gazing upon her. So we continue in the Gemara after seeing how sensitive to sin a young girl could be. Kibul Scharma Me'almona, the idea of learning the significance of reward from a widow. And here's the story. There was a widow that happened to have a synagogue in her neighborhood. Shivavusa means in her neighborhood. Again, this story also features Rabbi Yochanan. Then this lady left her neighborhood and walked a greater distance to reach the synagogue of Rabbi Yochanan. Omar Law, Rabbi Yochanan says to the woman, Biti lo beis hakneses b'shivusech, do you not have a synagogue in your immediate neighborhood? Omra lei, so she says to him, Rebbe, velo schar psios yeshli, rhetorically, do I not get reward for my steps? Psios, my steps. In other words, every additional step that I take in order to reach a shul, that itself has value. So that, and here you see, of course, schar, reward, and that's what we indicated, the receipt of reward. We learned from the Almona how she went out of her way, in a very literal fashion, in order to achieve greater reward. So this brings us to the end of the long question. Why does the source refer to the Basula Tzalainus and the Almona Shevovis as being Mevali Olam when you see now in the original source we didn't explain the term Tzalainus, but it would mean a Basula, that Tzalainus that prays. The word Tzalainus, maybe you're familiar with another Aramaic word, Slosa, meaning prayer. and almana, that has to do with neighborhoods. Here we have two stories involving a young girl and her prayer. The almana and matters concerning neighborhood that are presented in a very positive fashion. So the Gemara explains, Ki K'omar, when we said above, Mevale Olam Kagon Yuchni Bas Retivi. Here is an example, and you have this in a few places in the Shas, where the Gemara is very, very terse, and only by learning the Rashi do you see the full story revealed. And here is quite a story. Let's learn the Rashi together. Kagon Yuchni Bas Retivi. This is a name of a woman, Almona. She happened to be a widow. Mechashefa Haisa. She was a sorceress. Ukshamagia es leidas isha, when a woman who was pregnant reached the time of birth, through magic, through sorcery, she had the power of restraining the woman from actually giving birth. And this is a time that is extremely painful. Here the woman is in birth travails and is not able to actually release the child. And after she suffers a lot, this Yuchni Bas Retivi would say, "Oh, Eilech v'vakesh rachamim, I'm going to go and pray, seek mercy for you. Ulai tishmat vilosim, maybe my prayers will be hearkened to." And what would she do? She wouldn't go pray. She would go and undo the black magic spell that she had cast, and now, as I said, undo that, reverse it. And the child would come out. One occasion she had a hired hand working in her house, and she went to the house of a woman that needed to give birth. And this worker, who was now left alone in Yuchni's house, heard some clanking noises, similar, something, we'll call it the black magic spells were clanking in a vessel, just like a child moves around in its mother's womb. And the worker opened the seal to the vessel. The hakshafim yotzu, and the magic, the spell went out. Vavlad nolad, and the child was born. And just in other words, at that moment the child came out. V'yodu ki balas kshafim, he and her identity as a sorceress was revealed and known to all. So that the source above that spoke about a Basulat Tzarlinus and Almona Shevavis, it had in mind people, women like this sorceress that would make herself as if she's praying and make herself as if she's helping the neighbors, when nothing of the sort was really the case. We continue in our Gemara. My Kotan Shalo Kololo Chadoshev. That too was a term found in the source above. We have a little arrow to the left-hand side of the Gemara text where you can refer back to where you saw it earlier. What is meant by that phrase? A kotan, a minor, shelo kolu lo chodesh, literally that his months are not complete. I want to point out that this expression, kotan shelo kolu lo chodesh, is found elsewhere, and there it refers to a child who was just born that didn't experience a full-term pregnancy. In other words, a child born after, let's say, within its 8th month. That's called a kotan shelo kolu lo chodesh, and those kind of children, without any medical intervention, and given just natural surroundings, they would not live. Here, obviously, we're not referring to that, but knowledge of what it means in its say formal capacity has some value as we go on in the Gemara. So, what is a kotan shelo kolu chadosh in our context? Two explanations. Number one, Hocha targimu zet talmud chacham and mevayit ba'aboisov. This is the reference to a Torah scholar who literally kicks his teachers, but it means he's rebellious against his teachers. He doesn't follow their precepts, their instructions. And why is he called a Kotten Shelo Kolu Chadashav? Just like as we described before, it won't live out, it doesn't continue living. A person who rebels against his teachers, who don't follow, as we might say today, these are people that study Torah and they don't follow the tradition. They end up becoming deviant. They also will not live out their full lives, as the Gemara says in Maseches Chagiga that Rashi quotes over here. Number 2, Rabbi Abba Omar Zeh Talmid Shelo Higia L'Hayra U'Moira. What is a Kotten Shelo Kolu Chadashav? It's a person who studies Torah who hasn't reached the point at which he can issue halachic rulings and nevertheless issues halachic rulings. The Omer Bivo Omer of Huna Omer Rav, my dichtiv, what is meant by the pasuk that says Ki Rabim Chalola Mipila Vatsumim Kol Harugeha? And now the Gemara itself breaks this pasuk down into 2 parts. Ki Rabim Chalola Mipila. Literally, it means there are many murder victims he has caused. In other words, he's killed many. Zeh Talmud Chacham Shelo Higia L'Hayra U'Moira. This is a person who studies Torah, but is not fully matured in his Torah knowledge, and nevertheless he issues halachic rulings. And the imagery is quite vivid. So you're issuing halachic rulings, people will follow what you say, and they'll end up doing the wrong things, and that's tantamount to their dying. Vatsumim kol harugeha. The word atsumim, Rashi explains, has to do with closing, like you find oitzim einov, means one who closes his eyes. Atsumim in this context are people that keep their mouths closed and don't issue halachic rulings when they really have the ability to do so. So, Zeh Talmud Chacham Shigil Rav Eino Mora. He has reached the ability to issue halachic rulings and doesn't do so. That too is described as being associated with Harugel, means the murdered ones. We continue at the top of Omid Beis. The Ad Kama. Up till what point do we say he is fit, or before which he's considered unfit for Horah? The Gemara answers Ad Arboin Shonin, until 40 years. So Tosfos points out 40 years means 40 years from the time that he started the study of Torah. It doesn't mean 40 years of age. If a person reaches 40 years of age and he started learning Torah 2 years before that, are you going to say that after 2 years he's now reached the level he can issue halachic rulings? Obviously, if you're going to say it's 40 years of age, you don't have any one standard for all people. So, or you'll have a standard whereby it's one standard chronologically for all people, but it's not one standard for the amount of Torah study for all people. So rather, as Tosfos says, it's 40 years since you started learning from your Rav. The Gemara asks, Eini, is that so? V'ha Rabba Ori? We know that Rabba, he issued halachic rulings before he even reached age 40. He died at age 40, so he couldn't have been studying with his Rav for 40 years. So how can you say that that 40 years is the standard? The Gemara says, in the case of Rava B'Shavin, there's a machlokes Rashi and Tosfos and how to explain it. Rashi says, if in the case of Rabba, he was the equal to the greatest scholar in his community. According to the Tosfos, Rabba was not the equal to him, but he was greater than any other Torah scholar in his community, and hence he was, of course, an exception to the rule. Umakos Prushin, Harei Elu Mavale Olam. Once again, a quote from the Mishnah. Makos Prushin. Now, here we are going to see a list of, as the source says, Shiva Prushin, and the term Prushin itself, Parush Lefrosh, means to separate. It would, in our context, have to be associated, we'll say, with a type of false or excessive piety, which, as the Mishnah says, are Mavale Olam, are destroyers of the world. So what we, as far as the scheme of things is concerned, we present a Tanaic source. It lists 7 of these Prushin, and the double underlining that you see afterwards highlights each one of the phrases where the Gemara then explains what is meant by each one. Tonu Rabbanan, Shiva Prushin Hain. There are 7 Prushin. We're going to first read the source without any explanation, waiting for the Gemara to offer thus. Porush Shichmi, Porush Nikfi, Porush Kizoi, Porush Meduchya, Porush Machoivos V'Asena, Porush Me'avo, Porush Meira. Now, each one explained, noticing the double underline. Porush Shichmi, Zeh Ha'oise Maise Shchem. Shichmi, from the word Shchem, he whose behavior follows that of the people of Shchem. Shchem is a reference to the biblical account of the community that circumcised themselves because of the request of the sons of Yaakov Avinu, of course the story in Sefer Bereshis, after their leader had taken and cohabited with Yaakov's daughter. So, in order to, let's say, resolve the matter in a seemingly resolve the matter, the idea came up that the entire community should circumcise themselves. So Rashi says, they circumcised for the sake of being able to, let's say, intermarry with the Jewish people of the time. So their circumcision was not done with heavenly concerns, with pure motives. It was for, say, for self-gratification. Af zeh, the Porush Shichmi, likewise, Maisav Lahanoso, he does things for his own pleasure. Shechabdu b'nei adam v'lo l'shem shamayim. In other words, he might do things that appear to be praiseworthy, but he doesn't have God in mind. He does it simply for attracting public attention so that they should respect him. Porush Nikfi. And of course, bear in mind that these are Mavale Olam. These are people that destroy the world. They're not maintainers of the world. Porush Nikfi zeh hamankif es raglov. Literally, he bangs his feet. What does that mean? So again, we look at Rashi. Hamankif raglov mahalich b'shiflus. He walks in a seemingly lowly, humble fashion. Okev b'tzad gudol. He takes very short steps where it's heel to toe type steps. The Eino Meirim Raglov min Oretz, he doesn't lift his feet, he shuffles along, he doesn't lift his feet off the ground. Umitoch kach menakef etzba'oisav ba'avonim, and as a result of not lifting his feet off the ground, he ends up banging his toes into stones that are on the floor. Again, trying to create a false impression. Porush Kizoi, Omer of Nachman Bar Yitzchak Zeha Meikiz Dam Liksolim. The word Kizoi is the first word Meikiz Dam, bloodletting. What does it mean? He bloodlets in the walls. So Rashi explains, Meikiz Dam Liksolim, Oisa Atzmo Ka'oitzim Einov Shalistakel Benoshim. He makes himself as someone who's very diligent in avoiding gazing upon women. So he walks with his eyes closed. Sure, if you walk with your eyes closed, you end up banging your head into walls, and blood starts to flow. The next foolish character is Porush Meduchya. By when we say foolish character, of course one is supposed to avoid gazing upon women, but we're supposed to do so in a thoughtful manner, not walking with your eyes closed. You have to know how to avoid eye contact in certain areas and certain things. Many times you can spot something from the distance where the actual physical outlines are not that clear, and you at that point you already know how to avoid eye contact. But walk with your eyes closed, that's foolishness. Porush Miduchya, Omar Rabba Bar Shilo, the Meshapea Kiduchya. He's bent over like a pestle is tilted in a mortar. The Rashi, ki meduchya buchna asui kimakeves v'roshu kafuf. It's a type of crushing device that is bent over. So here again, you have someone that tries. The way he walks, conducts himself is in an attention-getting fashion to make people think that he is something that in truth he is not. Porush ma chovasi ve'esena. We saw in the source someone who says, "What is my obligation?" and I will do it. So, ha'amal yusi. This is a positive thing, isn't it? A positive attribute for someone to be concerned with what obligations he has and is desirous of fulfilling them. Why would you call him a type of mavali olam? The Gemara answers, Eladomar machovasi su ve'esena. Notice we add one little word and it makes all the difference. This is someone who says, what else do I have to do? In other words, he's expressing his reticence to doing what he needs to do. Do I have more to do? The Rashi. We took a look at Rashi on a few of these points. Porush machovos vesena limduni ma'olai lasos ve'aseh. This is at first we thought that that's what this is. Someone who is asking to be taught teach me what I need to do so that I can do it. So to this we asked, you see, that's positive. Rashi goes on, someone who's not expert in that which is prohibited and diligence and details of mitzvahs and comes and wants to learn it, that's a nice thing? No. So we explain, Rashi explains, what more do I need to do that I haven't done already? He creates the impression that he has fulfilled everything. That is the Porush Machovos Yasena that we said is negative. The Gemara continues, Porush Me'ava, Porush Me'ira. Me'ava means someone who loves receiving reward for doing mitzvahs. Loving to receive reward for doing mitzvahs is a certain level of behavior, but it's not one who is doing things out of an act of love of the Almighty. Simply because the Almighty requests, commands to do something, and that's why I do it, that's a higher level. Here we're talking about someone who does things because he's anticipating the reward he will receive for fulfilling mitzvahs. Me'ira is someone who conducts himself simply out of fear of punishment. What we're striving to do is to do things out of love of God, simply because God commanded to do thusly, that's why I fulfill mitzvahs. As far as reward is concerned, reward will come, but that's not what my primary motivation is. So, we continue in the Gemara. Porush me'avo, Porush mira, with the understanding that we just communicated, so we said that's not the highest level, and therefore they're put into this list of we'll say undesirables. Amru le Abaye v'Rava latana. Rabbi Rava said to the one reciting the Tanaic source above, Lo tisni Porush me'ava Porush mira. Don't teach them in the list of Purushim, the Purushim that were described as negative. Why should you not include these? The HaRav Yehonasan Berger, the Olam Yasik Odom, B'Torah Mitzvahs, Afilu Shelo Lishma. A person should always engage in the pursuit of Torah study and the performance of mitzvahs, even if it's not with the purest of motives or purest of intentions. Why? Shemitov Shelo Lishma Ba Lishma. Through the mere engagement in Torah study and mitzvah performance, even if it's without the purest intentions, you will come to Lishma, you will come to performing it on its highest level. Get into the routine. I don't want to use the word habit. Habit is quite negative. Become accustomed to doing mitzvahs, even with motives that are less than the purest, because it will lead to the purest level. Therefore, one who does mitzvahs out of love of reward, anticipation of reward, or fear of being punished otherwise, that's okay. Omar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchok, de metamro metamro, u de megalya megalya, beidina rabba, lispora mehani de chofu gundi. A lot of Aramaic words there, but before we get into, let's say, a more detailed translation, what Rav Nachman is describing is all these people who try to mislead the public through their false piety, they will become revealed. And in any event, the heavenly court will certainly punish them. Now let's look at Rashi. The metamra hanistoros metamra tamir is a word in Aramaic meaning hidden. So hanistoros miranam, those that are hidden from the community, people see behavior and they're not aware of what is really going on. V'aglios glios, and that which is obvious is obvious. And mikomokom lebezin agolu kulam glios. As far as the great court is concerned, they're all obvious and manifest. V'hu yifra min hamiskasim betalisos umaranasmun keprushim v'eino prushim. And he, the court, the Almighty, will punish those that cover themselves with shawls, with talisos, creating the image of piety when they are not in fact really pious. In one word, these are the fakers. Omar le Yanai Malka Lidvise. Yanai, King Yanai, he was a king in the Second Temple period. He also was responsible for the murder of many Torah scholars. To put it mildly, he was a negative character. And he says to his wife, just before his death, he says to her, Al tisyori min ha-prushim v'lo mi she'enon prushim elo min ha-tzvuim. Don't worry about vengeance from the truly pious. It's true that their own colleagues were killed because of me, but they will not carry out vengeance on you or our children, because that's not the way of those that are truly righteous. They don't take out their vengeance on those that they might be related, but they're not responsible for the disaster. So you don't have to worry about them. And the wicked, those that are not pious, you don't have to worry about them. They're my friends. Who do you have to worry about? Elaminat Tzvuim. The Tzvuim are those people that are the phonies, the fakers. They are people that try to create an image in the public eye when they internally are not like that at all. Shedoimin leprushin, they make themselves like pious ones. Shemaseim k'maise zimri umevakshim schar kepinchas, when their real actions are like those of Zimri. Zimri was a biblical character. He happened to be the head of the tribe of Shimon, who was a wicked individual who practiced open immorality. And he comes seeking request. The tzvuim, that is, they come and seek they request reward, like Pinchas. Pinchas, who was the antithesis of Zimri in the biblical account. And hence, those are the people, the phonies, those are the ones you really have to worry about. At this point, we have a new Mishnah, and you'll notice that the Mishnah itself is rather long. We'll spill over onto Daf Chof Gimel more than halfway down. I would like to point out that many of the points in this Mishnah are points that we've discussed earlier in the Masechta, but of course the Mishnah is the primary source for those that were simply quoted earlier on. The topic heading that we have on the side reads as follows: Machlokes Tanoim im schus toile b'mayim hamorim. A Machlokes Tanoim, a Tanei controversy that we've seen in the past, does merit on the part of woman help to protect her from the effects of the Sotah waters. The Mishnah: Reb Shimon Omer ein schus toile b'mayim hamorim. merit does not suspend the effectiveness of the bitter waters, the Sotah waters. If you were to argue to the contrary, that merit does work to suspend the effects of the waters or delay their effects, let's read that again. If you do say that merit suspends their effects, the word hamaorim is the same as the word morim, simply spelled a little differently, but it's a reference to these Sotah waters. And because if you say they do suspend, the merit suspends their effect, mateata, or there's another girsa, actually there's an explanation on the side, machshich gevono. Mate means you weaken the significance of the waters b'fnei kol anoshim ashosos, in the eyes of all women who drink it, u'moitzi ata shemra ala toros shishosu, and the result will be that aspersions will be cast upon those women that are really innocent, that drank the water and nothing happened to them. Sha'imrim, people will say, you know why nothing happened to them? Tameo saying, these ladies were engaged in illicit intimacy. Rather, they have other merits that prevented the water from taking effect. So just to review, what's Reb Shimon's approach? Waters, the Sotah waters are not restrained by merits a woman has, because the alternative would be a lot of motzi shemra, of la'aras, of aspersions being cast upon the women that are truly innocent. Rebbe Oimer hazchus toile b'mayim ha'orim, the merit that a woman has does have the effect of delaying the final death of the woman. Ve'eno yoledes, ve'eno mishabachas. She, as a result of guilt of having the forbidden intimacy, will now not be able to give birth. She will not improve. She deteriorates. And at the end, she dies from that very death that she would have died from had she had no merit. Nitmeis min chosa, if her meal offering, the Sotah's meal offering, became defiled, it depends. Ad shalo kidsho b'kli, if it became defiled before it was put into a Beis Hamikdash service vessel, which would impart upon the meal offering a kedushas haguf, an inherent sanctity. So if it hasn't achieved that level of sanctification, harehi kechol hamenachas, it then is like any other meal offering, v'tifte, and can be redeemed. V'im mishekidsho b'kli, if after it was sanctified in a service vessel, and then it became defiled, harehi kechol hamenachas v'tisarif, then the law that applies to all other meal offerings at this point would result in it needing to be burnt. As we've said in the past, and we'll say it again, prior to Kedushas HaKli, prior to it being sanctified in a vessel, it doesn't have Kedushas HaGuf, it doesn't have inherent sanctity. And as a result, even though you had sanctified it for the purpose of using it as a meal offering, it can be redeemed. Namely, the sanctity that you imparted to it can be transferred to money. Not so if it already achieved Kedushas Aguf by being sanctified in a service vessel. Redemption is no longer an option. It cannot be used because it's become defiled, so it is to be burnt. V'elu shemin choseim nisrafos. The following, and these points are going to be numbered off. You'll see we have numberings 1 through 5 at the top of Chof Gimel and Aleph. These are points that are related to the Sotah, to the woman and her mincha. Ha'omeres tamei ani lach. A woman, a Sotah, who says, I have really become defiled, meaning I am guilty. I had illicit relations. up till now, the whole Sotah process is a process involving doubt. We don't know. She's being brought to the Beis Hamikdash. She hasn't admitted her guilt. So we go through the whole process. But if she announces to us, I am guilty, that's Tamei Ani Loch. So the process stops, and the mincha that she had brought, originally dedicated, is no longer of any value, and therefore it is to be burnt. Let us point out once again, we're now at the top of Daf Chof Gimel Omid Aleph. Number 2, V'shebo lo edim shehi tamea, or witnesses came forth saying that we saw her in a forbidden act of intimacy. V'ha'omeres eini shosa, a Sotah who says, I refuse to drink the Sotah waters. Number 4, v'shebailo eino rotze lashgosa, or the husband of the Sotah does not want her to drink. Number 5, v'shebailo ba'alel baderech, a case where the couple was en route to the Beis Hamikdash, and the husband couldn't contain himself, and he had intimacy with her, but at that point she was already forbidden to him. So in all of these cases, the mincha that she had set aside is rendered useless and must be burnt. The Meforshim on the Mishnah, the commentaries on the Mishnah, point out that each one of these 5, where, for example, she says, I am guilty. She says that after the mincha was put into the service vessel, after it achieved Kedushas Haguf, and witnesses that came, they came after her mincha was sanctified. And each one of these examples is after the mincha, after her meal offering had achieved Kedushas Haguf. Even with regard to the case of the husband having relations with her, that only became known after her mincha was sanctified. In all these cases, her mincha is rejected and is hence burnt. And we say burnt, it means obviously not on the altar, but in that part of the Azorah where rejected sacrifices are burnt. Up till this point, all the items mentioned in the Mishnah have been discussed in previous Gemaras. From this point on, the topic of the Mishnah will be the focus of the Gemara's attention. V'chol hanesuos l'kehanim, women that are married to kohanim, in choseim nisrafos. This Mishnah is assuming that we're familiar with what the Torah says about Kohen Menachas, a Kohen himself who brings a meal offering. That meal offering is completely burnt. In fact, a Kohen meal offering is put completely in the fire. Now, there are distinctions within Menachas between a Minchas Nedava and a Minchas Chova, an obligatory type meal offering versus a voluntary meal offering. But let's just say, as rule of thumb, when a Kohen brings a meal offering, none of it is eaten by the other Kohanim, as opposed to a standard meal offering brought by a Yisrael. The handful of meal offering is placed on the Mizbeach, into the Mizbeach fire, and the remainder, the rest of it, which we call the Shirayim, that is eaten by other Kohanim. And this Mishnah deals with, I'll call it a gray area, or an area in between, which features the minchas of women that are married to Kohanim. So let's continue with the Mishnah. We've read already those that are married to Kohanim, their minachas are burnt. Bas Yisrael shenises l'kohen, a woman from a non-Kohen family who's married to a Kohen, minchasa nisrefes, her mincha is burnt. The Kohenes shenises l'Yisrael, the daughter of a Kohen who married a non-Kohen, minchasa ne'echeles, her mincha is eaten. In other words, after the handful is removed, the remainder is eaten by the Kohanim. Let us look at the Rashi at the top. We have Rashi v'cholam knows nesuas l'kenem min chesem nisrof safilu koraf hakometz kilchosav lo nitmu. Even though the kometz was offered properly, and there was no defilement, nisrofin shirayim beveis hadeshim before Shmura, the balance, the shirayim, are nevertheless burnt in the Beis Hadeshin. That was an area not on the Mizbeach, but it's an area where rejected korbanos were burnt, were destroyed through burning. That's as far as women married to kohanim. The Rashi, third line from the top, Minchos Necheles, this is a reference to daughters of kohanim that are married to non-kohanim. The Chol Minchas Kohen Kolil Tiyeh Lo Sochal Ksiv. It says in the pasuk, a minchas kohen is completely burnt and not eaten. Avol to kohenes and nesu Yisrael necheles, but a kohen daughter who's married to a Yisrael non-kohen, that mincha is not what the pasuk is referring to when it speaks about kolil tia completely burnt, but rather it's eaten. V'chein kohenes almona ugrusha shavim minchasa. Likewise, a daughter of a kohen that happened to become widowed or divorced, and she brings a meal offering. It is eaten after the kmitza, after the handful is burnt. We continue in the Mishnah. Diamonds are used to highlight the headings of these sections. On the side, under the nosei/mivneh heading, you notice the diamond is featured Hevdelim, distinctions bein kohen lekohenes, ish leisha. A Mishnah that contains a lot of, we'll say, general information. Differences between a male Kohen and a Kohenes, a female from whose father was a Kohen, and distinctions between men and women. Now the Mishnah continues. Ma bein Kohen lekohenes. What is the difference between a Kohen and a Kohenes? Minchas Kohenes ne'echeles u minchas Kohen eino ne'echeles. The meal offering brought by a female Kohen, that is eaten. The mincha brought by a male Kohen is not eaten. Kohenes mischaleles v'kohen ein mischalel. The daughter of a Kohen, if she has intimacy with someone forbidden to her, becomes mischaleles, is ruined, is disqualified from eating truma. She cannot marry a Kohen. A male Kohen who has forbidden relations remains himself unaffected. It's true, he sinned, but his status is not altered. Kohenes mitame lemesim. A daughter of a Kohen has no restrictions with regard to subjecting herself to defilement to the dead. Attendance at funerals, caring for the body, no problem when you're dealing with the Kohenes. However, the Kohen mitame lemesim, a male Kohen is not allowed to expose himself to defilement to the dead. Kohen oichel bekotchei kotchim, v'ein Kohenes oicheles bekotchei kotchim. When you are dealing with kotchei kotchim, those are sacrifices that have been sanctified as, let's say, the highest level. There are two general realms in kotchim, in the realm of sacrifices. You have kotchim kalim and kotchei kotchim. Kotchim kalim, light level, lower level sanctity, and kotchei kotchim, higher level sanctity. Those kinds of sacrifices that fall in the category of kotchei kotchim are eaten only by male kohanim, not by ladies, not by female kohanim. V'ein kohenes ocheles b'kotchei kotchim, as we just said. Ma bein ish leisha, and now we go into a much broader realm. What's the difference between a man and a woman? And here the Mishnah lists off 8 points of law, and these are from all over the Torah. Nothing here that's relevant to the realm of Menachos or to the realm of Sotah. As far as the sources for each one of these, the Gemara, as Daf Chav Gimel unfolds in the Gemara itself, sources will be given for each one of these points. We're not going to spend time here in any, let's say, in-depth or a broad explanation of these topics as they appear throughout the Shas in their respective locations. So here, as we said, the Mishnah asks, what are halachic differences between men and women? Ho'ish porea uporeim ve'ein ho'isha poras uporemes. This point has to do with a person who became a mitzorah. A person became a mitzorah, so a man has to porea and poreim. Porea, Rashi on the Chumash explains, megudel seir, must allow his hair to grow, and poreim has to do with tearing of the clothing. Not so in the case of a woman who is a mitzoras. The word porea, by the way, is a word that can have different meanings in different contexts. We had in the study of Sotah the word uforas rosh isha, where we explained her hair is revealed, is uncovered, and her braid is undone. Let's continue here. Ho'ish madir es benoi benozir vein ho'isha maderes beno benozir. There is an oral tradition, halacha l'moshe misina, that a father can impose upon his son a nazirus vow, and that would result in the son being prohibited in drinking wine, defiling himself to the dead, etc. For, of course, prohibition of haircuts. That is a power vested in a father with regard to his son. He can impose on his son, who is a minor, to observe nazirus. And that nazirus, by the way, will be binding upon him even if the son reaches godless adulthood during that time. A mother does not have that power. Number 3, Ho'ish megaleach al nazirus aviv v'ein ho'isha megalachas al nazirus aviha. Rashi's explanation here involves a man who accepted upon himself nazirus, set aside sacrifices which are to be brought at the end of the nazirus, but the father died before bringing those sacrifices. Had this man's son also been a nazir, the son can bring those animals that were separated, that were set aside by the father. So that's a right that a man has with regard to the use of sacrifices of his father for nazirus purposes. But a woman whose father was a nazir and she too had accepted nazirus, she cannot use the sacrifices set aside by her father for his nazirus. Number 4, Ho'ish mekadesh es bita ve'ein ha'isha mekadeshes es bita. On a Torah level, only a man has the right to marry off his minor daughter. A mother does not have that right. In other words, when a man wants to marry we'll say a little girl, he would give the marriage money to the girl's father, and she becomes a fully married Ashes Ish through that transaction. Not so with the case of a mother marrying off her daughter. Ho'ish mocher es bita ve'ein ho'isha mocheres es bita. The Torah gives the right to a father to sell his daughter as a Jewish bondmaid. A mother cannot sell her daughter as an amma, a Jewish bondmaid. Of course, that's a right that applies to a girl who is as of yet still a minor, under 12 years of age. Ho'ish niskal orum v'ein ho'isha niskeles aruma. When it comes to this penalty of stoning, for example, one who knowingly violates Shabbos and was warned by 2 witnesses not to do so, and nevertheless went ahead and expressed his lack of concern for his violation, that it results in the penalty of stoning by the court. So the offender, if he's a man, is stoned without clothing. A woman who is an offender is not stoned while unclothed. She's clothed. Oish nitle ve'eno isha nitles. When the court executes an individual, certainly if it's through stoning, the Torah mentions that the body is put up on a pole, is hung, is suspended from a pole for the community to see. That is done only if it's a man, not if the offender was a woman. And finally, ho'ish nimkar b'gnevasa ve'ino isha nimkeres b'gnevasa. When a person steals and he doesn't have the means of paying back that which he stole, so the Torah provides for him to be sold into servitude. If the offender, if the thief is a man, so he is subject to that, we'll say that punishment, that penalty of being sold into servitude. Not so if the offender was a woman. As you can see, we've gone well into Daf Chav Gimel, and therefore in the context of the Daf Yomi shiur that we are delivering, we've reached the point that we should pause. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.